Senior Content Manager with Trip 101. Today, we're meeting Zoe, who's going to talk to us about her travels in the Bolivian Altiplano. Zoe has been traveling for a really long time, and this is from one of her recent trips. So, Zoe, please tell us more about yourself first, and then maybe the destination that we're covering today.
Sure. So my name is Zoe. I am a freelance graphic designer and I am the creator of the blog Duende by Madame Zozo, which is a travel blog about pursuing new and unique experiences around the globe. I'm Australian. I'm currently based in the US. I've been an expat for about 10 years now. And I love to travel because I love to learn. I think the most fun way to learn is to immerse yourself and get hands-on and experience things firsthand.
Oh, wow. How long have you been running your blog?
Oh, it's 8 years now.
Oh, wow. So do you, every time do you travel, when you travel, you come back and update your blog about your most recent trip?
I do. I write up my itineraries and guides to cities, national parks, packing lists, all those things that try to be useful to travelers who are going to that destination.
Wow, that's pretty great that you like to share your knowledge about your trips. Yeah. Tell us more about what kind of traveler you are. How frequently are you able to travel? You have a full-time job and you travel on the side, isn't it?
That's correct. I do travel on the side, and I usually do probably two big international trips a year, and then I do a few smaller domestic or short range trips to fill in the gaps and keep the travel bug at bay.
So do you like plan your time away from your full-time work ahead of schedule, like so that you're able to accommodate these two biggish trips and then the smaller ones?
I'm a big planner. Usually we travel in a 2 to 10 day time span, and we try to achieve as much as possible in that time. So we make sure that everything is planned and researched well in advance so that we can achieve everything that we want to.
That's pretty great. Yeah. What about who do you travel with? Do you travel solo or is it with someone or family?
I mostly travel just with my husband. Occasionally I will travel solo, but that's fairly rare these days.
Okay. What about your trip to Bolivia? Was it a solo travel or was it with your husband too?
That was with my husband. That was a big bucket list trip to South America at the time. I don't think we realized quite how much we would travel in the future, so we tried to cram a lot into that trip.
Oh, okay. And when was this trip?
It was pre-pandemic, so a few years ago now.
Oh, okay. So tell us more about when did you go and what time of the year it was?
So we traveled in late March, early April to Bolivia, and that is sort of the shoulder season or the end of the wet season.
Yeah. Oh, and you said it was a bucket list sort of travel for you. So what was it about Bolivia that attracted you, or why was it on your list?
Well, it wasn't initially. We built the trip around two big bucket list items, which was to experience Carnival in Rio and the 4 day Inca trek to Machu Picchu in Peru. And then we thought, while we're there, what other big things would we like to see and experience? And Bolivia was something that kept coming up in our research, and that really intrigued us.
Oh, okay. So um, when you went, what it was the shoulder season, right? So what was the weather like when you were there?
So the weather for us, we were fortunate. It was quite dry in terms of rain. But one thing travelers should know about the Altiplano is sometimes there's some hangover flooding from the wet season. It takes some time for the floodwaters to subside, and that can prevent you from accessing certain parts of the Altiplano. We were fortunate it was only one distinct site that we had to strike off our itinerary, but it would be maybe a month later, maybe between May and September would be a more ideal time to guarantee you that access.
Oh, but you must have enjoyed the benefits of being at the visiting in the shoulder season. You must have not encountered crowds, and it would have been more budget travel, maybe.
Yes, on both of those accounts, definitely. In fact, there were instances, a couple of instances in the more remote parts of the Altiplano where we were the only people staying in that accommodation that evening. We had a very exclusive experience, but quite by accident.
Yeah, that's the benefit of going in these off times. Yeah. So since you said you're a big planner and you know you do a lot of research, so did Altiplano live up to your expectations when you arrived?
Yes, I think it was. I probably didn't know as much about Bolivia as I did some of the other destinations we went to in South America. And I was surprised and delighted. It really was as jaw-dropping as we hoped.
Okay, that's really good to know. Yeah. So tell us about how did you, so it was a part of your larger trip to South America. So how many days did you spend in the Altiplano?
We spent 6 days in Bolivia overall, and all of that was on the Altiplano part of Bolivia.
Okay, okay. So did you directly arrive in the Altiplano or was it before, you know, like you were visiting some other cities in Bolivia as well? Just the Altiplano. Uh,
It was just the Altiplano. So we did visit the capital of Paz, but that is actually up on the Altiplano as well. So we didn't leave that part of Bolivia. A lot of the rest of Bolivia is the Amazon basin, and we had visited the Amazon in over the border in Peru. So we weren't looking to repeat that experience. So we were looking more for what was unique about Bolivia that we couldn't see in the other destinations.
Okay, yeah. So maybe it's time to deep dive into, you know, the 6 days that you spent in Altiplano. So would you like to share your itinerary now?
Sure. So our first day, we were in Peru to begin with, and we were crossing the border at the northern part of the Altiplano, which is where you'll find Lake Titicaca, which is South America's largest lake, and it spans the Peruvian-Bolivian border. So we started out in Peru and took a bus down to the southern part of Bolivia, the southern part of the lake, where we were able to cross the border into Bolivia. And from there, we went to a little port town on the lake called Copacabana. And it was actually the town, is the namesake for Copacabana that most people know in Brazil. And from there, we got a catamaran out onto the lake and out to an island called Isla de Sol, the Sun Island. And it was significant historically to the Inca people because their origin story said that the sun god had sent two of his children to Earth and they had emerged from the lake. So it was a pilgrimage spot for the Inca. It's a very scenic island, and there's a living museum there where you can experience and learn about some of the culture and history of the region, including, you know, feeding the llamas, walking around the terraced hillsides, which is typical of agriculture in the region. We experienced a shaman ceremony and learnt about the food and textiles of the region. And then we returned to the mainland and we hopped on a bus into La Paz for the evening. So day two, we started out with a half-day city guide and our tour guide took us mostly by foot. We were staying just on the edge of the historic district, and we went to explore some of the historic architecture and learn about more of that in the context of the history of Bolivia. And we went up to a high point in the city where there's a lookout and you can get sort of a feel for how the sprawl of the city across the surrounding mountains. And in the afternoon, we continued down to the south of the city where you'll find the Valley of the Moon, which is a unique geological formation. And it's a series of hoodoos, which are sort of tall rock spires that form through erosion. And that's a fun hour spent exploring the paths through the different rock formations down there. Day three was mostly a transit day. We had a big distance to cover from La Paz to Uyuni, and we hopped on a 4-hour bus to Oruro, which is a mining town that was established in the 17th century. And there we had some lunch and transferred to our train, which was the Expresso del Sur. And that takes you on a 7-hour journey down to your uni very comfortably, very scenic journey. You get to see a lot of the landscape along the way. On day four, We went straight out to visit the world's largest salt flat, which is the Uyuni Salt Flat. And it's about 10,000 square kilometers in size. So obviously you only cover a small portion of it. There's a few different sites you can explore around the salt flat. One of them is very popular on Instagram, is the train graveyard. And it's a series of abandoned trains. They were abandoned when the railroad stopped being operational in the 1940s. So they're beautifully corroded and sort of a nice photographic position in the landscape. Another is the Colchani salt mines, where they're still mining the salt from the flat by very traditional methods, meaning very labor intensive, basically manually shoveling the salt into these even piles and then letting them dry out and loading them into vehicles and taking them away. We also had a beautiful picnic on the salt flat. As I mentioned before, we were experiencing still some of the flooding was left over from the wet season. And so I would say that the floodwaters varied across the salt flat. There were parts that were very accessible and there are other parts that weren't accessible. So we had the picnic in a shallower area, and then we had to skip our last site of the day, which is an island that was out in the further reaches where it was too deep. That's in Hawassi Island, and it's known for being a sort of a rocky outcrop, which is an island in the salt. It's actually the tip of an extinct volcano, and there grows a particular species of giant cacti, which looks like it would be a beautiful spot if we could have made it. On day 5, oh, sorry, I should mention there that that evening we stayed in the Palacio del Sal, which is the Salt Palace, and it is a hotel on the edge of the salt pan that is made of salt. It's largely made of salt bricks. The floor is salt. A lot of the furniture is made of salt, or at least the base of the furniture, the hard bases are made of salt. And so that's a really interesting experience and definitely one that added to the overall trip.
Oh. With so much salt around, can you also like feel it and taste it?
Yes. So day 5, we started out with a four-wheel drive with a driver and a guide because we were starting to go off-road. Where we were going was into the more remote southwest corner of Bolivia towards the Argentinian and Chilean border. And so we really needed expert help there for the driving conditions, but also because there's no roads. So navigation wise, we're also going into remote parts where a lot of people don't speak English. In fact, a lot of them only speak indigenous languages, or Spanish is a second language for them as well. So it was great to have someone there to translate for us. And we started out the day visiting a couple of small villages that had been established through either local mining industry or llama herding. And we had a lovely lunch in one of those villages, and then we continued on to a couple of the more natural attractions of the area. One of those was some rock formations that were fun to climb and photograph, and another was some ancient rock paintings. We spent the night in a family-run guest house in a tiny little village called Villamar. I had a wonderful experience there. The hotel is built up against a rock formation in a cliffside, and so it has a lot of unique character to it. And we experienced a lot of local hospitality there. And day 6, which was our final day, but maybe the most spectacular, we actually drove towards the Chilean border via, and I'm going to read this because it's a long name, the Protected Reserve of Andean Flora and Fauna Eduardo of Aurora. Oh. So there was many highlights in that day. It felt like every 30, 40 minutes, we would come across a completely different landscape. It was like visiting another planet. So among those highlights were geothermal features like geysers and hot springs where you could actually swim. And we also had passed through a desert called the Valley of Dali, referring to Salvador Dali, and it looks just like one of his paintings. You could really just see the melting clocks. And lastly, there were several different lakes, and they all had very varied and interesting personalities. One of them, Laguna Colorada, has an algae growing in it that attracts pink flamingos. And you will not see a pink flamingo anywhere else on the Altiplano. So they're all clustered around this one lake in the middle of nowhere. It's quite an incredible sight. And another, as you're nearing the Chilean border, is Laguna Verde. And it is a brilliant turquoise lake at the base of a very conical volcano. And the color comes from the fact that it has high levels of natural arsenic. So nothing lives there, but it has this incredible color. And from there, we made our way to the Chilean border where we were making our crossing. And this was, I think, an experience in itself. It was one of the most unique border crossings that I've ever done, because basically you're still up in a very remote area of the Altiplano. It's nothing more than a little shack with a boom gate. And the Bolivian tour guide and driver can't cross to the Chilean side and vice versa. So they have to make sure that they're coordinated. And then when you arrive, the Chilean pickup is waiting for you, which thankfully they were. And so we transferred over to the Chilean side and were driven into San Pedro, which is the nearest town. And that also has an airport where you can get out to Santiago and bigger airports with more international flights. So that was our complete 6-day itinerary on the Bolivian Altiplano.
Quite incredible, the trip that you had, and especially like all the geographical, variations that you spotted. So from the lakes to like vibrant valleys and the volcanic, the lake that you described,
Yes,
plus
yes,
the salt flats, and it's quite a wide range of natural features and geographical variations that you were covering within very few days. So how did
it
it
is.
feel to while you were there?
We were just constantly astonished. We thought it was a really good value trip, and all of the locals were very welcoming and friendly and helpful.
Even for La Paz, that when you were describing the short span that you were there, I think about 2 days. Within the city itself, there was quite a few variations that you said, like it's a capital, one of the capitals that Bolivia has. So of course it's like urban, but even you were venturing out to see spots and very different types of attractions on the periphery of the city as well, right?
Yes, that's right. You don't have to go very far to find something really unique in the landscape.
So while you were in the Altiplano, a lot of your meals were, you said one was a picnic on the salt plant, and then all these meals were also, more locally sort of sourced, or were you also visiting some restaurants? Like, what is the experience like when you're there in the Altiplano?
Yeah, it was a mix of mostly we tried to eat local food wherever we were. Obviously, we had a much bigger choice when we were in La Paz, but for the most part, we were eating more traditional Bolivian food, especially as you get out to those more remote areas where there's limited resources. So that would generally be like an egg-based breakfast with maybe some cold meats and breads, yogurts, and fruit. And then for lunch and dinner, it would be generally a protein like a chicken or beef with a carbohydrate like a rice, quinoa, a lot of potato. And then you would have maybe fresh fruit for dessert. And a lot of that was pre-organized for us because we were in these areas where there wasn't access to restaurants and cafes and things.
You were pretty much out there in the wild, so to say.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
we were.
Yeah, you have to adapt to whatever is available in that sort of terrain. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So you told us that you entered Bolivia via a bus, and then when you were in La Paz, mostly you were exploring on foot or taking taxis as well.
Mostly on foot. We stayed in on the outskirts of the historic district, and that area was where most of the sites were, at least for a 1 day trip. That was where we centered our attention, and that was all very walkable.
Okay. And then once you were onto the Altiplano, then you had a driver with you to take you to the various spots.
Yes, so we used a little bit of public transport to get as far as uni, the buses and train, and then once we were in uni, we were really reliant on having a driver with a four-wheel drive vehicle.
Okay. Yeah. You were also saying that not many people even spoke Spanish. So did you struggle, or was it the guide that you had sort of helped you out with that?
The guide took care of most of that. Obviously, he wasn't with us all of the time, and we do always try to learn a few phrases in the local language. So everyone they meet you halfway. They can see you're making an effort. They will come the other 50%, and we figured it out. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty great. Yeah. You do need some of that, at least, like, someone who's able to communicate on your behalf, at least when you're in that kind of, it's very different from what you would be in your everyday life, and it's such a different terrain. So definitely, yeah. Zoe, would you like to share some of your pictures now?
Sure. So this first photo is from the Sun Island in Lake Titicaca. So this is a shaman ceremony that we were experiencing, but you can also see in the background a little bit of the landscape with the lake, neighboring islands, and on the far right, the terraced hillsides that is typical of the agriculture in this area. Next up is La Paz. This is the historic district of La Paz, and it was by chance that we were visiting when there was a military parade taking place with a band. So we got to experience some of the historic architecture, like the cathedral in the background, but also with this local display. So this is a view from a sort of raised lookout point called Mirador Kili Kili in La Paz. So you get a sense of the city, how it sprawls upwards onto the hillsides. This is the Valley of the Moon, where I was talking about those rock formations that are created by the wind and water erosion. A photo of the train that we took from Aurora to uni. And these might be a little out of order, but this is our picnic spot out on the salt flat. So you can see how bright and reflective it is with all that water sitting on it.
It almost looks like a beach, but like a part of a beach, but then it's not.
Yes. Exactly. So this was just a picture of us taken from the car as we were driving by some interesting landscape. You can see there's llamas grazing all over there. Sorry, these are out of order a little. This is back at the salt flat. And again, so when the salt flat is flooded, the water is so still and the surface under it is so white, that is technically considered the largest mirror on Earth at 129 kilometers across. And even though we didn't have any brilliant cloud formations to get the reflection, you kind of get a sense of it with the mountain there in the distance.
Yeah.
This is the mine at Colchani, where you can see them piling up the salt to have it taken away. This is inside the Palacio del Sol, which is the Salt Hotel. And what you're looking at here is the restaurant with all the tables and chairs made of salt. You can probably see on the left-hand side then the salt bricks that the walls are made out of. And again, another communal space in the hotel where you can see some of the salt bricks, salt stairways, the salt floor, the more furniture that was made of salt. They really went to some effort.
So
And this
fascinating.
was sunset. It's from sunset across the salt flat from the hotel. This is a picture of the landscape with the railway graveyard, the train graveyard in the foreground, and some of the rock formations that we visited on our drive across the Altiplano. And there, I popped that one in, and my husband's sitting up on the rock on top there just for a scale. That was a four-wheel drive vehicle that we were driven around in reasonably comfortably throughout the journey across those little parts of the Altiplano. And I just put in a selection of the landscapes we saw along the way because there were so many fantastic ones. This is quite a large specimen of a very, very slow growing plant. So that's probably hundreds of years old, even though it doesn't look that impressive.
Oh wow, it's a plant.
This one here, yeah, that's actually a plant. It looks like moss covered rock, but there's actually all the plant structure is underneath there.
Fascinating.
And this is the Laguna Colorada, where the pink flamingos flock to, and we have that great mountainscape in the background with the snow-capped peaks reflected. This was the guest house we stayed in the small town of Viamar for the night. You can see how it's built right up against that rock formation at the back that kind of gives the interior of the guest house a bit of a cave-like feel in areas. Some of those amazing geysers and mud pots and geothermal features with all the different color rock and soil. And this was the thermal hot spring on the side of the lake where we were able to actually take a quick swim, and the Valley of Dali. That is Laguna Verde, the one I was talking about that has the high arsenic content. So it has a quite incredible color and the volcano on the Chilean Bolivian border. And that was our last stop that day before we crossed the border. And I've got a quick out the window shot of the border crossing so you can see it's fairly rudimentary and you're out in the middle of nowhere. So you really want that someone meeting you on the other side.
Wow, I'm amazed that when you shared that shot of La Paz from top, how densely populated it was, and then compared to when you come to all these natural features, and it's so sparse and there's hardly anyone around. You're just the one person there in that frame. So it contrasts so much.
There's a lot of contrast. Yeah, yeah. It makes it a really exciting trip. You never know what you're going to get around the next corner.
Yeah. And those flamingos against that background was amazing.
Classic, just incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, your pictures were really, yeah, quite great. And it helped me put a sense when you were talking about it, of course, you paint a picture, but then yeah, the photos are also so amazing to just see it against, like that contrast of things that you were in. So let's come to
Yes,
your,
it's quite gives you a sense of the scale.
yeah.
Sorry.
So let's come to the accommodations that you stayed at. You briefly mentioned
Mhm.
them while you were covering your itinerary, but could you tell us more about them? So there were three that you must have stayed at, or what were there more?
Yes. So Hotel Rosario in La Paz was the first accommodation. And that was just, I should say, first, generally, what we were targeting in terms of accommodation was just something that was basic, comfortable, clean, hot shower, comfortable bed, quiet. We weren't looking for any great amenities. Obviously, that's not an option in some of these locations, but we weren't looking for five-star luxury or anything like that, or a resort type accommodation. So we were in mostly tourist grade hotels. So the Hotel Rosario fit the bill perfectly. It was a colonial Spanish style building, which really fit with the surrounds. And we were in quite the edge of the historic neighborhood, which made it very convenient and accessible to a lot of the sites. We felt quite safe. As I said, we walked quite freely around the area and didn't have any issues. There was some adjustment initially because in the streets they had a lot of street markets, especially at night, and it could feel quite chaotic. But you soon sort of reached your equilibrium and realized, oh no, this is okay. This is just normal. And then once you're inside the hotel property, it was very quiet and calm. I think that probably the key thing about that property was there was only a lift to the second floor. So if you were on a floor above that, you would need to be capable of taking the stairs.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was in a busy neighborhood, the hotel. It was the edge of the historic part of the town.
It was, I mean, generally it was not too busy, but in the evenings they would set up the markets and then it would draw a lot of more people to the area. And obviously it was a popular tourist area. So that you had a tourist element and a local element creating more of a crowd.
Yeah. But in terms of location, then it placed you pretty close to the places that you wanted to visit. You were walking to some of them as well, right?
Yes, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have any meals at the hotel?
We just had breakfast at the hotel, and as I described before, it was a lot of like juice, cereals, yogurt. There was usually an option to have eggs and cold meats, cheese, and a variety of breads and pastries. And that was the standard across most of the hotels.
Okay. Okay. So overall, did you enjoy your stay? Did it meet up to what your expectations were?
We did. We thought it was very good value and it was exactly what we were looking for. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. Then after your hotel in La Paz, what was your next stay?
So then we were out at the Palacio del Sal, which was the salt palace out on the shore of the salt flat. And that was one of the evenings where we were the only guests at the hotel. So we had very attentive service, as you can imagine. It was you might balk at a hotel made of salt, but it was actually very comfortable. It wasn't five-star luxury, but it was comfortable. And we found it's about 45 minutes to an hour drive out of the town of Uyuni. You really are out there on the edge of the salt flat all on its own. So it's not somewhere you're going to walk to or that you can drop into a cafe next door. It's so once you're there, you're confined to the hotel itself. It did have a few amenities like a pool and a spa, and we found the restaurant, we ate dinner and breakfast there, and we found both were quite good.
Hmm. So it was like, uh, again, from your pictures, the terrain is completely barren and it's just that this one salt hotel which is standing in that area.
Yes, in that area, it's the only structure. And so you really have this 360-degree view around the mountains on one side, the salt flat on the other.
Yeah. And then at the hotel also, you were the only people.
Yes, we were the only people that night, being the that early shoulder season. There weren't many other travelers around, and apparently we're the only ones staying at the Salt Hotel that evening. So we had free reign on the place. We could explore, take lots of photos. We wandered around the inside, the outside, and really tried to make use of the daylight hours to see as much as possible. And it was very quiet, as you can imagine, in the evening, not just because there were no other guests, but because you are isolated out there on the salt flat.
So compared to the previous experience, which was on a busy street in which there was,
Oh, complete contrast.
yeah, what an
Yes.
experience, truly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was your second stay. What about the next one?
So the third one was Malcu Cueva, which was a small village of a VMR. And that was the one I mentioned was built against the rock formation on the hillside. And that was a lovely little guest house that was run by a family and very comfortable. Some of the rooms were actually, the walls were the raw rock wall behind. So it felt a little bit like a cave, but it was very warm in the chilly environment. The food was excellent. And in the evening, when we were having dinner, the local school teacher brought some of his students by to sing us folk songs, it was a lovely touch.
Mhm. So this was a cozy, intimate sort of stay that you had, the last one.
It was, yes. And to be honest, there wasn't any other option at the time. I don't know if there's been any other accommodation built there since, but at the time it was the only guest house, which I guess means they could have done bare minimum, but they didn't. They really made us comfortable.
That's pretty great. Yeah. And for the previous one as well as this one, the only option to have meals was again at these accommodations, right? There was nothing else around.
Yes, at the time that was all there was.
Yeah. I'm glad you had a good experience at both of them.
So am I. No, I would be happy to recommend both. Yeah,
So you enjoyed your stay at the guest house as well.
we did. Yes.
Okay. Let's move on to the next section, which is about what tips would you want to give or any kind of advice that you would want to give to first-time travelers to Bolivia and the Altiplano.
Sure. I would say number one is to learn a little bit of Spanish, just the basics. Please, thank you, a greeting, maybe some practical questions like where is the bathroom would be useful. Like I said, a lot of the remote towns, an indigenous language is the first language, so Spanish will be their second language. And so that will be your crossover point when you're in places like La Paz or even up near Lake Titicaca, which are more touristed, you might get some more people speaking English.
Yeah.
My second tip would be to just remember when you're setting your expectations that you are going to the far reaches of a desert, like a very harsh desert environment in a developing country. So to set your expectations accordingly. And I think if you do, you'll be really delighted with the experience. If you're looking for five-star resorts, it's definitely not the right destination for you. But if you're looking for an authentic experience, local interactions, a little bit of solitude and nature, then it's perfect. My third tip would be if you want to have a more relaxed visit, would be definitely to hire yourself a guide and a driver, particularly for that last leg, those last few days across the more remote parts of the Altiplano navigation, unless you're really experienced to that or you're used to driving rough terrain in a four-wheel drive. It would be definitely a more relaxing experience to have some professionals doing that work for you.
Yeah.
The Bolivian Altiplano averages about 3,750 meters in altitude, which is about 12,000 feet. And that is well within the altitude sickness zone. So it's very common to experience some symptoms while you acclimatize to the altitude. So my next tip would be to, especially if you're a sea level dweller, is to visit a travel clinic or a doctor who can give you some advice about how to deal with the symptoms of travel sickness and give you your options in terms of preventative medication and those sorts of things. And along with that, one of the entry requirements to Bolivia is an international certificate of your yellow fever vaccination. So you would have to make sure that you have that. My fourth tip was take plenty of sun protection with you, because especially in those big barren landscapes, there isn't tree cover, there isn't natural shade, and there's a lot of reflective surfaces like the salt flats. So you want some really good sunglasses, really good sunscreen, and just to cover up wherever you can.
Anything about special clothing or shoes in case because you might be walking a lot in that terrain?
Sure. So the climate is cool, sort of temperate summers and cold winters. So you will probably be covering up or dressing in layers anyway. And then you want some really good sturdy shoes that you can walk around, even though you were not going to be necessarily hiking any distance. You do want something that's going to be supportive, that you can get around quite confidently on uneven surfaces, sandy deserts and salt flats and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. Those were all pretty great tips from you. Yeah. Zoe, I think they will be really helpful for someone who's planning a trip to the Altiplano. Definitely. Yeah. So we're more or less coming towards the end of our session now. So I want to ask you, from your trip to the Altiplano, what was the best part of it? Like, or what's the most memorable thing for you? It's been a few years that you went. So
The landscapes really stand out. Just the variety and the scale of the landscapes was quite incredible. And I've traveled a lot since, and I haven't been able to match it or anywhere. It still is a unique experience.
do you have any plans to go back to Bolivia?
Not immediately, but if the opportunity came along, I would grab it with both hands. I would definitely love to return.
That's pretty great. So it's a destination that impressed you, and you would want to sort of go back to see some of the spots again.
Absolutely, yes.
That's pretty great. Yeah. What's your upcoming travel? Any trips planned for the coming few months for
I
you?
do. Yeah, so my next destination, I'm going to do a road trip across the Canadian Rockies from Calgary to Vancouver. So some mountain time for the summer.
Okay. Wow. So I hope you have fun on that trip. And
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for sharing about your trip today. It was really great listening to you. And I hope that our viewers will find the information that you have shared today useful, and it'll help them plan their trips.
I hope so too.
All right. With that, I'll close this session. Thank you.
Thanks.